Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first edition of the For Women in Science Festival, organized by the Fondation L'Oréal and UNESCO, and broadcast today on 5 continents. My name is Annabelle Mandeng. I am your Master of Ceremony. I have the pleasure to have with me Alexandra Palt, Executive Vice President of the Fondation L'Oréal, and Shamila Nair Bedouel, Assistant Director General for Natural Sciences of UNESCO. Alexandra.
Thank you, Annabelle. It is a great joy to welcome all of you to our For Women in Science Festival. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen how women scientists are essential when needing to respond to existential threats to our health, to society, to the planet. And still, women scientists meet tremendous obstacles in their careers and their research. Even if progress can be noticed, only 33% of researchers worldwide are women, according to the latest UNESCO report. This evolution is still too slow. Important barriers persist, and the glass ceiling remains a reality in research. Women's access to the highest level of responsibility and recognition is still rare. Since the creation of the Nobel Prize in 1901, women represent less than 4% of scientific Nobel Prize winners. The same situation can be seen regarding access to the most cutting-edge areas of research. In artificial intelligence, women make up only 22% of researchers. This is not just a problem for women. This is a problem for research. To be relevant, research has to be inclusive and needs all its talents to be mobilized. This situation is the result of systemic barriers, of unconscious bias, of self-censorship, but also of persistent sexism and discrimination at all stages of women scientists' careers. This is why the Fondation L'Oréal is working with UNESCO to support, promote, and highlight women in science. And with this first edition of the For Women in Science Festival, we also want to celebrate them and to show not only their breakthrough discoveries, but also their resilience.
Indeed, Alexandra, gender equality is at the heart of the mandate of UNESCO. The world needs science, and science needs women. And one way of doing this is to showcase exceptional women. And this is what UNESCO and the Fondation L'Oréal have been doing for the past 23 years. We are committed to showcasing exceptional women in science, to make their work and talent more visible, and to inspire younger generations to pursue scientific careers. Women are not only hesitating to choose a scientific career, they're also leaving science for lack of equal opportunity in the workplace. This is one finding of the UNESCO 2021 Science Report. While the pandemic has demonstrated the ingenuity of women researchers, several studies show that female scientists, particularly those with young children and those in early stages of their careers, are hardest hit by the pandemic. We need to change these trends, and we need to do it urgently. We need the models for women and girl scientists, and we need to put the spotlight on critically important scientific work done by female researchers across the world. 122 laureates, more than 3,800 female doctoral students, postdoctoral students have been supported and honored in 110 countries through the L'Oréal UNESCO for Women in Science program. UNESCO looks forward to carry out our joint work with the Fondation L'Oréal to further promote gender equality in science for current and future generations.
Thank you, Jamila, and thank you, Alexandra. And now, let me tell you what we have in store for you. The agenda for this festival is organized around regions to give voice to the international diversity of women scientists and to welcome you from all over the world. Across the event, you can meet 40+ extraordinary women STEM researchers, discuss their career journeys, and debate what holds women back and how to overcome biases and systematic inequalities. Indeed, resilience is something that these women scientists have in common. They have needed passion, but also courage, patience, and perseverance to stay the course to succeed. After today, you will be able to watch the replay of the festival content and more on this platform, don't hesitate to spread the word and share all these inspirational stories with your friends and families. And get everyone to vote for your favorite talks. Now, let's start right away with 2 inspiring examples of the extraordinary contribution of women to science.
My name is Juliana Chan, and I am a L'Oreal for Women in Science National Fellow. And I am also a scientist turned science communicator. I can think of no better way to set the context for my talk today than to show you a picture of one of the most distinguished scientists to have ever lived. She really needs no introduction. You know her. This is Marie Curie, the first woman to win a Nobel Prize and also the first person and still the only woman to have won the Nobel Prize twice. Today, I bet you $1 that if you tried to ask anyone on the street to name you a woman scientist, they will immediately say, oh, that's easy, Marie Curie. There's only one problem with that. This amazing scientist lived, worked, and died more than 100 years ago. That's a century ago. It's very much harder to name a living scientist. Even though scientists think of themselves as intellectuals, we come up with hypotheses, we are academics, we don't necessarily think of ourselves as public intellectuals. So even though we have a public-facing role, we do some outreach, we don't necessarily think of it as part of our job description, perhaps aside from teaching or speaking at industry conferences. And that gap, the gap between scientists and the general public, is the gap that I am trying to bridge. Now, how many of you know these 2 people? They just happen to be living Nobel laureates from Asia. On the left is Tu Youyou. She's the first Chinese woman to win a Nobel Prize for her discovery of artemisinin, and this is a treatment for malaria. Just this year, the World Health Organization declared that China is finally malaria-free for the first time. This is after a 70-year-long battle, 7 decades of fighting with malaria. In the 1940s, there were up to 30 million cases of malaria a year. And today, zero, thanks to in part to the contributions of Youyou. And on the right is Shinya Yamanaka. He is also a Nobel laureate and a Japanese orthopedic surgeon. He discovered a very elegant way of turning skin cells, any part, we shed skin cells all the time, into cells with stem cell-like properties. And he called it induced pluripotent stem cells, or iPSC. And thanks to his invention, it is now possible to reduce or avoid using human embryos and animals for medical and cosmetic testing. Thanks to the contribution of Shinya, scientific research is now a lot more humane. So these 2 scientists from Asia represent the pinnacle of science, and there are more of them. In early 2010, while studying in the US, I was studying at MIT for my PhD and my postdoc, I noticed that the top science magazines that I love to read tended to focus on scientists from the Western Hemisphere. I mean, you see Asian faces, of course. There are Asians working everywhere, but not from the continent of Asia. And that's really my origin story. This is a primary reason why I began Asian Scientist magazine, first as a .com, and then later as a print magazine once we received seed funding. But please don't get me wrong. I think it would be unfair to expect a European or an American magazine to be the voice of scientists from Asia. If a magazine is called Scientific American, it wouldn't be unreasonable to expect to see American scientists in it, isn't it? There are also many other reasons why you don't see nearly enough from Asia. There are language barriers, there are cultural differences, and of course, Asia being a very large, heterogeneous continent with many countries. There. These are some of the magazines that we've published over the years. A decade since I've started it, I've left my faculty position as an assistant professor in a medical school in Singapore, and I've now become a full-time publisher and CEO of a company I founded, Wild Type Media Group, which focuses on science communication from Asia and also helps companies trying to enter into Asia in the science and technology sector. You know, my mission has not changed in the decades since I began it. There are two of them. One is to make Asian scientists household names, and two is to help Asian science go global. Among the many projects that I'm proud to have started at Asian Scientist magazine is the Asian Scientist 100. This is a list that was inspired by Time magazine's 100 most influential people list. Here you can see some of them. I've been compiling this list since 2016, and to date, because we have done it 5 times, we have 500 of Asia's movers and shakers, from academia to industry and leadership. When I began this list, I had very humble ideas for it. I had assumed and hoped that conference organizers might tap into the list to look for speakers for their conferences, or maybe universities in the West might look at my list for people to recruit. That was all. But what I did not expect was that the dailies across Asia, these are newspapers from India to Vietnam to the Philippines to Hong Kong, Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, they started featuring the scientists that were on my list. And they said they were from my list, of course, and sometimes on the front page, some of them in languages that I can't even understand. I was very happy, but I was even more surprised when the Philippine Senate, one of the legislative chambers of the Philippines, decided to pass a Senate resolution honoring 8 of the Filipino scientists that I had put on the list. And they said they had brought honor and glory to the country for their commitment in the fields of science and technology. Can you imagine that? I really want to go beyond the rhetoric today and tell you about 3 scientists that I really love from my Asian Scientist 100 list, and that you really should know about. There you go. Let's take a look at Gay Jane Perez. So she is the first Filipino to be honored on the ASEAN-US Science Prize for Women. This is in 2018. She pioneered the use of satellite data to improve agricultural crop yields. This is a new field known as precision farming. She also led the first team that put the first Philippine microsatellite into orbit. This satellite is called Diwata-1. And 2 years later, she put its successors, Maya-1 and Diwata-2, also into orbit. Next, I want to tell you about Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw. She is the founder and chairperson of Biocon, India's largest biotechnology firm. She also happens to be India's richest self-made woman, self-made being the key. In 1979, with just $500, she founded the company with one product, an enzyme that makes beer less cloudy. And we know that's important, of course. Since then, in the 4 decades since, she has grown the company to be one of Asia's largest biotechnology firms. She has made therapeutics and even innovative biologics, such as CAR-T therapeutics, this is an immunotherapy, and bispecific antibodies. Next, and how about Chang Mi-man? I love her. She's a Chinese paleontologist, and she's investigating who we are and where we came from. She won the L'Oreal UNESCO For Women in Science Award for her contributions to the fossil record and for showing us how we transitioned from aquatic vertebrates into life on land. It turns out that a lobed-fin fish, an ancestral fish that lived 400 million years ago, is that evolutionary link between marine life and mammals on land. So, you have heard 3 stories, but there are many, many more. For each of the scientists that I've spoken about today, there are thousands, thousands who have achieved as much, if not more. If we can hear these diverse stories alongside that of Marie Curie, we can weave a much stronger global scientific fabric, and we will see all sorts of people, women, ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, underrepresented group, people of color, all consider themselves eligible, eligible being the key for a career in science and technology. And my job, I think I've got a great job. My job is simply to tell you their stories. The stories of Yo-Yo, of Shinya, the stories of Gay, Miman, and Kiran. Honestly, I think my work has just begun. So I invite all of you in the audience and all of you watching my video to join me on my mission of making Asian scientists household names. Thank you for your support.
Hello, everyone. I am Sita Coleman Kumula. I'm the president of a not-for-profit scientific organization that researches and removes toxic chemicals called PFAS from water and from the environment. I'm here to talk to you about the imposter syndrome. For those of you who may not know what that is, it is defined as a feeling of inadequacy and self-doubt that persists no matter how educated you are, how experienced and accomplished you are. I'm probably not the only one. I'd like to see a show of hands for those of you who might have felt that. It's good to see that there are women and men who feel that way. I have to tell you that I have experienced that for a long time. I was born in a poor and very loving but extended family in India that really believes, even to this day, very, very strongly in education. My grandfather made me memorize multiplication tables of 12 at age 4. I spent most of my childhood worrying about not coming first in my class. So an underachiever under duress, an overachiever under duress, you see. Fast forward, I came to the US to do my PhD. I had to do an exam called Graduate Record Entrance Examination. I was handed a sheet of paper. I took the time, I answered all the questions, well argued, multiple choice. I gave it back to my professor, who looked at it and he said, "You didn't answer any of the questions." I nearly fainted. I was terrified. I showed him my answers and he said, "No, no, no, you have to take this pencil and circle the ones that are correct in black." I was absolutely sure that I failed. I did pretty well, but the feeling that I had failed persisted for a long time. I wonder how many people still would have remembered that. But feeling that you failed is quite a normal, that you're not adequate, that you have self-doubt is a normal emotion. And yet, research by KPMG showed that 74% of women executives who were interviewed said that they experience imposter syndrome perhaps more than men do. There are many personal as well as organizational dynamics, power dynamics, and gender dynamics that lead you to believe that you are an imposter. In my case, I stayed away from interviewing, applying for business management jobs because in my family, business was for second-rate scientists. You either became a doctor, my daughter the doctor, my son the doctor, or you became a famous research scientist. And I found later on that this was quite common among Asian women scientists in my organization who didn't apply for business management jobs. But let's talk about the organizational dynamics. The KPMG research shows that 6 out of 10 times women feel that imposter syndrome at the time of either moving jobs or changing roles. There was a time in the petrochemical organization where I worked. It was a major reorganization. It was a merger. I was offered perhaps my best shot at breaking through the glass ceiling. The boss that I got was from a different organization. He was from a manufacturing organization that had only male engineers. I was the only female research scientist. Most of the others were male engineers. It was completely rigged against anything because his framework of perfect performance was rigged against me. One day, the human resources director came to see me and said that I should get to know him better. I just simply did not realize what I had to do. I was good at the job. I knew how to do the job. I just didn't know how to play the politics. Besides, I don't golf, I don't fish. These were the normal ways of bonding in that organization. So I realized what the HR manager was telling me was that I had to fix myself. That was a long time back. Since then, don't fix the women, but fix the workplaces where women work, have now become a rallying cry for many women in all races, in all places. Thank God for that. So I left. I left the corporate world, and I started, since then, since leaving, I started many profit and non-profit organizations. In the process of starting these, I found my passion for a purpose, which is applying the science and the scientific understanding of many of the problems that were created by the organizations, by the companies I worked. I apply that knowledge to solve some of the more urgent problems, many of which impact women. My message to women scientists all around the world is the imposter syndrome really limits us in our careers, but more importantly, it limits us from contributing to the most important urgent problems that the planet is facing today. The planet needs more than 50% of its people to heal. So my message to you is find your passion, create the organizations. If you want to, you can join the organizations or create your organizations, but don't fall victim to the imposter syndrome.
I do believe that women are resilient by nature.
Curiosity, our creativity, and our affinity for collaboration.
I like to think of resilience as strength. And when you find something you love and you do something you love, you will find that strength.
Being away from my family for nearly 10 years.
Female scientists are able to actually move on regardless of the challenges, obstacles.
Be resilient, be strong, be a woman in STEM.
The pandemic has sped up the progress of the digital revolution into all areas of everyday life. Yet, STEM remains a sector where women are systematically underrepresented. The speakers in our next roundtable will discuss what progress looks like for their countries and regions and how to achieve solutions to make STEM careers more inclusive.
Greetings from Paris, and welcome to our panel on advancing women in STEM all around the world. I have today with me 4 speakers who are scientists, policymakers, and advocates who are representing diverse populations from all around the world. They will be providing us a report, an update on the narrative and status of women in STEM from their region, which ranges from Guatemala, the United States, France, Argentina, and South Africa. As for myself, my name is Juliana Chan. I'm the founder and chief executive officer of Wild Type Media Group, and I'm also a science journalist. I'm very delighted to be a moderator for today. So I will be introducing our 4 speakers one by one, starting with, of course, Professor Karen Hallberg. She is a For Women in Science Laureate 2019 for Latin America. Hello, Professor Hallberg, welcome. She's a professor in physics at the Balseiro Institute in Argentina and also the principal researcher at the Bariloche Atomic Center. Professor Hallberg, would you please share with us your journey and your work in using computing approaches to understand the physics of quantum matter, and perhaps a little bit on your work on ethics and social responsibility of scientists. Karen, please.
Thank you very much, Juliana. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here in this very important subject, promoting women in STEM. As you said, I'm from Argentina. I live in the south of Argentina, in Patagonia. There's a research institution, and we do research there with my students. I also teach. But apart from my professional career in physics, as you mentioned, we're doing state-of-the-art numerical calculations and numerical codes to study the quantum behavior of matter using quantum information technology. I'm very interested in promoting women in science, also promoting other less advantaged groups of society in science.
Thank you, Professor Hallberg. Next, we have Professor Françoise Combe. She's a For Women in Science Laureate 2021, a most this year recent laureate. Congratulations. And you are an astrophysicist at the Paris Observatory and a professor at the Collège de France, where you have been the chair of galaxies and cosmology since 2014. Professor Combe, would you please share with us more about your work on galaxy formation and evolution, please?
Yes, I am doing research at Paris Observatory and observing galaxies and looking back in time to go to the Big Bang to know how the galaxies are forming at the beginning and forming the stars, in fact, that consist all the disk of galaxies. And of course, the stars are formed from the gas, so that we observed a lot of molecules, organic molecules in the interstellar space. They are forming a lot of stars, and that's why we are here with the sun and the Earth. And about women in STEM, I am also promoting them. I have been in my career about 37 PhD students, and half of them are women. So
it's actually very great to hear that there's so many women in astrophysics. So thanks for the update. Moving on, we have Africa Flores, Severe Land Cover and Land Use Change Lead at the NASA Applied Science. So Africa, could you please share with us your journey that led you to move from Guatemala all the way to the University of Alabama in the United States?
I grew up in Guatemala, and I remember the stories of my parents and grandparents enjoying natural resources, clean water, playing in the rivers, fishing there, some luxuries that I didn't have in my hometown when I was growing up. That really drive my interest to study something that helped me to manage our natural resources, because in this very small piece of land, there is so much richness, but it's so badly managed. So that led me to study agronomy and the field of STEM. Over there, I discovered geographic information systems, and I started working with satellite data. And that's how I made the jump to the program Servir, in which our main goal is to build the capacity of countries around the world to use satellite data and air observations for environmental monitoring. I had the opportunity to go back to Guatemala and use AI and satellite data to forecast harmful algal blooms in one of the most beautiful lakes in the world, Lake Atitlan. No bias because I am from Guatemala, but it is the most beautiful lake in the world.
Okay, last but not least, we have Ms. Doni Kunu. Doni is a bilateral engagement lead for climate change at the Adaptation Research Alliance at South-North. So, and you're also pursuing your PhD at the Global Change Institute at Witwatersrand University in South Africa. But Doni, what I'm most interested in is the project that you started, Black Women in Science, a non-profit that you set up to support young Black women scientists. Would you please share a little bit about your main job, and then, of course, Black Women in Science, please?
So my main job is really looking at climate change and climate research and trying to see how we can move from the research into the actual action of these projects, be it water solutions, be it energy solutions, be it infrastructural solutions, but we really focus on how do we move into the action. And then, well, within that journey, I obviously started an organization called Black Women in Science, and this is because I saw that the higher I went in the academic ladder, the fewer people I saw that looked like me. And then I realized that there's actually a term for it called the leaking pipeline, meaning that we have women coming in as undergraduates or in high school going into undergraduate level, first year of university or tertiary, and then you see them like disappearing somewhere when it comes to their postgraduate studies. And so I was more interested into why is that happening and how do we make them stay in the system and how do we retain them in that system?
Well, the leaky pipeline that you described in South Africa is certainly also present in Asia, where I'm from. So I guess we have a lot to talk about.
Yes.
Without further ado, I'm just going to go on to a very important question. I would like to find out from our 4 speakers, what is the situation like for scientists in your country, or perhaps more broadly, your region? And in the past 10 years, have you seen any changes or improvements for women in your field of research, either through more traditional career paths or non-traditional career paths? I know that's a very big question, but what I really am asking is, what have you seen in the last 10 years, and do you have anything good to report back to BASE today? Maybe we'll start with Karen.
I would like to be much more optimistic at this stage of evaluating the situation. I'm optimistic in the long run, but you know, a couple of years ago, UNESCO announced that less than 30% of the researchers worldwide in science were women. This number includes social sciences and humanistic sciences, so I would venture to say that women working researching in STEM are much less than that. I don't know the number because that hasn't been evaluated properly. But imagine I would just maybe we are, I think, less than 20% of researchers worldwide. I'm just guessing, but that must be the number. In Latin America, in Argentina, the situation is slightly better. For example, in Argentina, in physics, there are 30% students, women students who are studying physics, but then that number decreases very rapidly while the women continue in their careers. So this is a little bit worrying. This still has to change, it has to evolve. I'm optimistic because the numbers are increasing very gradually. So now we have maybe 30% plus of women. We have a positive slope, although the slope is quite flat still. There's a lot to do. And if we look at women working in, for example, quantum computing and quantum technologies and quantum science, which is my field, then it's much, much less than that. I say, in the conferences I participate, there are less than 5% women. So there's a lot to do, and I think it's great that we talk about this because I hope we can inspire other women to continue.
Well, thank you for telling us, and we will be talking about some ideas on how we can change that. Moving on, Africa, why don't you share with us what has it been like? I guess you can speak for both Guatemala and also the United States, because you've seen both countries.
Yes, exactly. I think that there has been significant advances, but there still remain main challenges to be addressed. There are more women studying STEM fields. I am in the field of Earth System Sciences, and you can see a lot of entry jobs as well, but one of the main issues is the leaking pipeline, maintaining and retaining women in these fields and for them to occupy higher level positions. On the good side, I think that I have seen in these 10 years, which the field has advanced tremendously, I have to say, because we have never had as much data and information as we have today from satellites to monitor our world, and things are moving super fast. But also a very good change is that there had more and more networks of women that I didn't know that existed. And then they're just creating as we speak. We have Ladies of Lanza, Sister of SART, and a lot of many other like Geo Latinas, and that very strong networks that allow us to stick together and share experiences, learn from each other, and know that we are not alone, which is something very important, because many times, particularly in this field, you may feel that you do not belong. It's a boys' club out there. But with these networks, you realize that there are other women that are going through the same issues. And we also support each other at the academic level to promote our research as well.
Thanks, Africa. And moving on to Françoise, please tell us how it is like in Paris or France more broadly, or maybe you can even speak for the European region.
Well, in France at least, and European, it's a little different from the south and the north, you know. There is the Latin countries, Spain, Italy, France, which have a lot of women, well, at least in STEM, it's 30%, 35%. And the north, Anglo-Saxon, Germany, for instance, is much less. So there is some cultural facts about that. And for France in the past, it was 30, 35%, and we see that in the senior level now. But there is a worrying tendency in the last 10 years that to get a permanent position after having a PhD, then you have to wait more than before. Before it was 1 or 2 years, you had a postdoc for 2 years, and then you get a permanent position. So it was really favorable for women. And then now you obtain a permanent position at 6, 7 years after your PhD. And this means that you must be mobile to go to one place to the other and other countries. And this for women is very difficult because they want to settle down, to form a family and so on. And of course, men are more favorable. They can wait for a longer time. And in general, they don't abandon. So it's more competitive now for women, I think. And we see that already in the young people. It's less than 30%. And I think we have to react to that. But a more positive point is for the senior one. I think that before there was a strong glass ceiling, that there was no people, no women in director of institute or president of university and so on. It is now people are aware of that and are selecting more women at the high level. So, for instance, I can give an example. When I entered, there was no women at all in astrophysics, for instance, and now in STEM there is about 10% elected in academy. So it's a great progress in the last 10 years. There is also in college where there is a lot of selection also. But there is humanities and STEM, so it's 20%, much better. University president is 15% now. It's a real progress. And the director of Institute for CNRS is even 25%. So I think in the senior part, there is a positive tendency, and in the junior part, unfortunately, and that we have to react that and to solve this problem.
I have noticed too that the length of time between your PhD and a faculty position has actually lengthened in Asia as well. But 6 to 7 years seems like quite a long stretch. The point you brought up about positions becoming less permanent and more contract-based is also a worrying problem that I see in many parts of the world. Doni, how about South Africa?
So I think it's very similar to the trends that we have internationally, but obviously we're having a slower trend of growth in South Africa, and it goes back to access, it goes back to finances in my country, in the sense that it is a privilege to do a postgraduate studies, it is a privilege to go to university. Education is not free and very expensive. And so I think that on its own creates the inequality. And as Africa said, we tend to focus now as okay, let's get our students from their high school, their primary school, into universities to study science, and then we leave them, and then they're left alone, and then it gets lonelier and lonelier, and the ones that are staying in the system are now getting discouraged. And so one thing that I've realized that the networking is very, very important. As an organization, if we provide our fellows with business training or communication training or writing training, they don't actually care about that. What they actually want is to be able to sit with someone and say, I'm really struggling to do this. How did you make it? And how do I get out of this, you know? And so that's what they appreciate more, is sitting together and communicating together. And most importantly, I think the positive side of this is that they are now wanting to become mentors. They are now wanting to change the status quo. They are now wanting to have impact on the ground. And you don't have to kind of find them. They're kind of saying, I'm here. Is anyone listening to what I'm saying, you know? And I think that is so great, because now you have women who want to stretch themselves outside of their science block that says sit in your lab and get out results and publish papers, and they're saying, wait a minute, I can't publish unless I feel that I belong here and I feel like I'm worthy to be here. So I would definitely say it's mentorship, it's wanting to be visible. It's also the networks that are coming in, that people are now wanting to become in networks and talk about their issues. And most importantly, it's about how they are realizing that they can actually have an influence to younger women.
So, because you're currently in your graduate studies, do you feel well supported right now as a woman in science in your university?
I don't want to attack my university. No offense to my university. You know, I feel like they're doing their best. But I think as working with the women that I work with right now, in my organization I've worked with like over 250 black women. And we're having a challenge of the science discipline itself, in the sense of it actually being designed for what the modern scientist wants. So the modern scientist wants to understand, where do I fit in the world? Can I start a business? Do I fit into a bigger picture? Can I communicate my research? When I communicate my research, does anyone care? Is anyone willing to invest? And they're not adjusting to these needs. And so then people are saying, oh, I just want to get into entrepreneurship and business. I don't think I want to get into science. I want to get into communication. And it's not that science is a bad industry. I think what they need to do as institutions is incorporate skills like communications, like writing, like, you know, engaging, like, you know, just changing the game a bit to fit into the changes around us, and no longer just focusing on you have to publish to stay in sciences.
Many of these organizations are very good at supporting us in traditional academic career paths, right? But then are we able to support young scientists on non-traditional career paths? And you really mentioned something about what young scientists aspire to do, which is to spin off companies, start up, be founders and innovators, inventors, you know? So does the Black Women in Science do that? Do you
yes,
provide
definitely.
That resources?
Yeah, so our training specifically focuses on scientists that want to understand business. Where do they link up in business? Where do they link up in communications? And that is, for me, very important. So we focus on, if you have an idea, can you make it financial? If not, that's fine. But the fact that you want to think about something else, do it and really understand that. And the importance of this is that when you stand in front of people, you are able to communicate what you're doing, because you're no longer just speaking to the general scientific audience, but you're communicating to a broader audience.
Yeah, I mean, the commercialization of science is one aspect that I wish more scientists were taught in graduate school. I certainly wasn't, and I think it would be very helpful if we were given a crash course in that. Well, we definitely have a lot to wish for in terms of what we would need, and you've touched a lot of these topics, Doni. Maybe we'll start with Karen on this. What do you wish or hope for that your governments and your academic institutions can do to encourage, at the start of the pipeline, girls to enter scientific careers, and when they are already in scientific careers, how do we retain them and push them and help them along? Because we are seeing a very dramatic change in the way researchers do their research during the pandemic.
Well, thank you for that question, because I think it's one of the most important ones. What can we do to change the situation? I think we need a deep cultural change, and so the society and government and private entrepreneurs, that we should all be pushing towards this important cultural change. Science has, from the government, let's say, because since it was your question, science has to be much more open, it has to permeate more in the society. It has to be more present. We need a lot more scientific culture from the beginning, since they are in the kindergarten, the children should learn to think more. I mean, think what is called the critical thinking or scientific thinking. I don't like to call it scientific thinking because it's not only related to science. To learn to think has to do it's a skill you learn for the rest of your life. And it's very important that the young girls and boys, like they learn to ride a bike, they also learn to think, the abstract thinking, logical thinking, to be careful with magnitudes, even with lateral thinking, to be creative. So I mean, during their careers, I think it's very important to consider, for example, child care centers at the research institutions, because I have 2 children, and I had them at the beginning and at the end of my PhD, and I was able to continue with my career. I only stopped for 3 or 4 months with each child because I had a child care center on campus. This was fundamental for me. I could breastfeed them because it was very important for me to breastfeed them until they were a year old, while I could continue with my career without stopping or interrupting a scientific career is sort of a major disruption. So this should be avoided. And of course, I mean, that comes from the family, sharing with the partner, household and everything. The evaluation has to be flexible with women who are pursuing scientific careers. Of course, it shouldn't go in detriment of the scientific excellence or scientific response, but yes, it should be flexible. It should consider child care leave or even maybe adult care. I mean, if we have elderly living at home with us. So I think this should be incorporated in the evaluations, again, without detriment of the scientific career. So this is one of the things that COVID left us. The other thing I think is very positive is the possibility of having hybrid conversations or hybrid or even long-distance conferences. Not only for women who have to take care of women or men, they have to take care with household duties, but also for us living in remote countries. It was very important for us, the possibility of being able to participate in conferences or in talks, seminars of people all around the world.
I cannot agree more, because we always think that you need some dramatic policy change, and sometimes you just need a childcare facility on campus, isn't it?
Yes.
But there are, of course, many things we can change from small to big, and more flexible policy performance evaluations would be very, very good start. Okay, thank you. And moving on, Africa, I'm very interested in your story because, in particular, you shared with me that you had a child during the pandemic, and that is a very unique experience, I must say, because you probably are balancing working from home, and you probably couldn't get as much help as you could because of social distancing. So, could you share with us? From the perspective of having had a child, what would you like to see different? Maybe in your case and also for everyone else.
Yes, I can attest how difficult the pandemic was for a young scientist or the middle career scientist that is at the stage of having kids. I have my second child during the pandemic, and childcare was closed, so we have our daughter 3 years old and a new baby, and we have to work. One of the maybe main things, I know that we are in the 21st century, but in the US particularly, it's necessary to have mandatory paid maternity and paternity leave. So to normalize that women can work. We don't have to feel that we have to choose between family and our career. And that's the position in which we are right now. And that's why in the tech industry and science, it's very difficult. It's extremely difficult. You feel that you have to choose. And by implementing these policies that maybe they are normal in other parts of the world, I think that is long needed for the US to implement this. Another thing is affordable and effective childcare, which also doesn't exist in that form in the US, because it makes it very difficult for women scientists to be a scientist. You know, you always feel like you have to be choosing between both careers.
I actually understand what you're speaking about, because I spent many years in the US as well, and I saw some of my colleagues who had kids, and it was very challenging for them. So what did you do if you weren't offered paid leave. Do you just take unpaid leave or sick leave?
It's unpaid leave. So
Unpaid
because I had been working for such a long time, I was able to accumulate enough leave.
Like annual leave?
My annual leave, all my vacation, all the thing, and it's only 12 weeks. Actually, we have FMLA, so it only allows for 12 maximum. That's the maximum that you can take, which is unpaid. So I think that that creates unequal conditions. And one thing, an additional thing I would like to mention is that gender equality in STEM is not about asking for privileges to women only and, special conditions for us. For me, gender equality in STEM is a matter of human rights.
Exactly.
Because as a mother, I have a completely supportive husband, but what if he would not be with us? And we actually, we were completely vaccinated when we got COVID and nothing bad. But you have to be prepared to take care of your family. You're a working woman. And I should be allowed to take care of my own family if I am working, right? So that's why it is a matter of human rights. We are just asking for a just system. Just for justice, it's just a matter of that, and implementing these small changes that they are not that small because they have real implications of how we stay in the field are critical.
I feel you. I had 2 babies when I was an assistant professor in tenure track, and I had actually 4 months of maternity leave, and even then, I found it very difficult already. So I can only imagine if you had to take, accumulate all your annual leave, and even then, it wasn't, maternity leave that was your right to,
Yeah.
And moving on, Françoise, how can we make our workplaces more, inclusive of women talents? I think this is all aspirational, but I think some of that you can already implement.
Yes, I agree very much with all Karen has said, and I think, for the job given to women, I think that we were discussing a moment ago about the postdoc and the long time to wait. I think that we could, at least the government could follow what is done in the US, for instance, where you have a tenure track, where you can be, it's not completely permanent, but at least it promises that after a few years you will have a permanent job, if you succeed, of course. At primary school, you have a cultural problem and stereotypes. When they are young, even before 10, that girls have these ideas in the mind that there are some jobs that are not done for girls, and we have to change that because it's not true. When you look at girls in studies, in universities, they are more successful. The exam, the end of studies are more successful. They are 55% to succeed and 45% of men. So they have more success in maths, in physics, and so on. But it's just after that they are going to another path, not engineer, because it's not a girl job. And as for the COVID, I think indeed young women, at least, not senior one, because it was even better for senior ones, but for young women who had children, in fact, it was very, very difficult. And the solution we had is to give them more time to finish their PhD, for instance. So we gave 1 year more, and it was accepted.
That's very good.
So, so at least, and it is also taken into account when you take a job to people, and there are competition with men. You have 1 year more for each child who have grown up. So this is taken into account. So even for awards or for any elections, we take that into account. So at least we are aware of the difficulties, and we take a solution for that. So for the COVID, I agree also that the Zoom meetings were very, very useful.
I remember many times I couldn't attend conferences because I had an infant. I had 2 children while I was in my tenure track. So that was a challenge for me. Françoise, you talked about stereotypes in primary school, in books, in textbooks. I think the media has also a lot of role to play, because now I'm a science journalist and publisher. I can tell you, if you take a look at any of the TV shows and movies, or just like a stock photo library, it's always, a male scientist and 2 assistants who are always female.
Yeah.
I think we have a huge part to play in this changing this narrative
It will
of
take
who
time.
is a scientist. Thanks for sharing. Doni, what would you say you would like to see change in South Africa?
I think, you know, in as much as, you know, it was great to have Zoom meetings and have access to Zoom meetings, but majority of South Africans and Africans don't have access to data. And that's another conversation, that it becomes even more of the privilege to get data. And so once lockdown happened, our universities completely flipped, and now lecturers had to go online, but the students don't have data. How do they provide access to data so the students can learn online? Never mind data, laptops. You know, there's a huge, you know, different level of accessibility. So when I read one of the articles during COVID, it was around publishing and how it shows that women are publishing less in open-ended journals. So I support open-ended journals because I want people to have access. And so for me, it would be, how do we encourage women or incentivize women or universities, how do universities incentivize that women publish more, that women from developing countries publish more, and incentivize them by giving them data, by giving them time, by giving them a laptop, you know, and all of that is very, very important, because maybe little things that we might look at as a normal access, someone else doesn't have. And so even if someone is in as a woman scientist and they're told to go to a Zoom meeting as an African scientist, they might think this is too much work. I have to manage that my student doesn't have data right now, and they need to write the exam. And how will they write the exam? How do I monitor that? So I can't attend the Zoom invite that I'm being invited to. So how do you incentivize them and make sure that within these conferences that are online, we have representation within those conferences? It was much easier if you are walking down the corridor in university, and you bump into a conference or something that's happening in a lecture room, and you decide, oh wow, well, let me join, is it free? And you go in and you join. Now there are costs involved, there's data involved, there's laptops, there's technology, there's quality of, you know, it's a lot, and it all comes down to access and affordability. And so for me, it's about how do we even ensure diversity within those Zooms? So if we are looking at how many participants were there, how many of them were from African countries or developing countries, or how many of them, you know, were African, how many of them were Latin American, you know, how do we ensure diversity and not think we're doing such a big impact, but we're actually just talking still, the higher elites are still just talking to each other, but it's now that they can just meet between China and America, and, you know. So for me, it's always about access, and are we really being sure about that within that access during COVID, are we still being fair to women and to African women and to, you know, upcoming scientists and emerging scientists?
Very, very powerful words. Thank you very much, Doni. All right, I would like to thank our 4 speakers for their generous insights today. Clearly, there's a lot more work that needs to be done, but fortunately, we have 4 of you leading your community and your country. So I thank the audience for your participation, and perhaps you could join me in giving our speakers a round of applause. Thank you. Thanks.
Just persevere and keep on going in your direction that you like. Find something that you like and stick to it, and be the best at it.
Faire un métier qu'on aime. Et ce que je voulais, c'est des challenges, oser, agir, dépasser les barrières.
Resilience is certainly something that women in science need. I think science is a very challenging culture.
Significa hacer de la ciencia una forma de vida.
Standing up for those who are voiceless, who are trampled on, who are dispossessed.
Really never give up.
Next on our agenda, an interview of Dr. Firdausi Kadri, the immunologist who has created the first oral vaccine for cholera, led by the Fondation head Alexandra Palt.
Professor Kadri, thank you so much for being with us today. So let me start with the beginning. When you decided to study, to become a scientist, that was probably not very common in your country. Can you tell us a little bit about how your journey started?
So thank you, Alexandra. Hello. Let me go back many years ago. When I was a little girl, when I grew up, I could see many things in Bangladesh that needed attention. So I started thinking about many things that I could do. And then I studied biochemistry. Then I became a biochemist. And then actually women did study even at that time, but they did not use it for public health as much. But when I was studying, when I was training, I always felt that whatever I did must be of use to the country, and research was very important. Women still did a lot of teaching, medicine, practicing, but not research in that sense. So I started thinking about research a lot more, and that's how I became a scientist and what I am today.
And how did you decide to study infectious diseases? Because, as you said, you studied with biochemistry. So how was the way from biochemistry to infectious diseases?
Biochemistry, as the biochemist says, is the father of medicine. They boast about that. So I was no different. And because I knew biochemistry and because I saw so much suffering in the country of 170 million people, the thing that I could do to help my people or the global people is to use the knowledge to work as a public health person. And that's how I started doing infectious disease. There was every disease that I could think of in Bangladesh.
You specialized on one particular, which is cholera. Can you take us a little bit, what are the public health implications in your country in general of cholera, and what have you tried to achieve, and what have you achieved? How far have you gotten?
I just want to say that I actually did not only specialize in cholera, but also in other diseases that for the enteric infections like Shigella, cholera, and typhoid, all these diseases that cause so much suffering to the people. And so cholera became a major point at that time because there was a lot of cholera patients everywhere in Bangladesh and globally. But there was no realization that there should be something to prevent it. There was good treatment. Less people died that were reported, but there was a lot of cholera, still is. So that was when I started studying cholera, looking at the human body with patients who are coming to our ICDDRB hospital. And there you could see it comes in peaks twice a year. And then you could see that, every year, similar number of patients would come from May to June, one peak, again from August to September, October, 1,000 patients a day in the hospital, unthinkable. They were treated, but we could prevent those 1,000 patients coming to the hospitals. And this is only one hospital. All over the country, there were many more patients. So then the thought about understanding the immunology of natural infection with my team, national and international, and also trying to understand how vaccines work in our settings. We know so much about COVID vaccines now, but at that time, we did not know how well the vaccine worked, and in different settings, in children, in adults, in young children, because this is a disease of life course, all ages, 1 year and above have cholera. So this is how I started working on cholera, trying to understand the details of the human body, the immunology, the mucosal immunology, and also at the site. Those were useless if we did not apply something to prevent disease.
But you also work on how to get it then to the people, to the population. Yes. So what did you find out? When do people adopt vaccination? What role women play in this? What is the dynamics?
So we did have a vaccine by 2007-08. We did have a vaccine that was affordable, easy to administer. But it was not being used in Bangladesh. Actually, the world wanted a vaccine to be used in developing countries, but there are many hindrances. There's the matter of cost, the matter of our national immunization system accepting another vaccine. We have many diseases like the world has. So then I thought that, working in the laboratory, trying to understand the disease was not enough. I had to get out in the field with my team. I had to let national, international people know that this vaccine, to study whether it is feasible to use the vaccine in Bangladesh. And that's how I started all my work at the field level, especially in the urban slums. You know, in Bangladesh, because of climate change and all that, there's a lot of exodus of people coming from rural areas into the cities, and that's where a majority of cholera cases come from. Now we have a national cholera control plan in the country, which the Global Task Force of Cholera Control has endorsed, the Bangladesh government has endorsed, and we hope that by 2026 we will have vaccine given to many people, 173 million doses or more.
Before going a little bit more to your story, perhaps also a little bit about COVID. And I think you were also involved in the research around COVID-19. And what did you learn about using social media and technology and mobile phone data? Because I think that's how you traced outbreak trajectories. What did that bring to your research, and how is it evolving?
So I was doing cholera and Shigella and typhoid at that time, completely different from COVID, but exactly similar problems. So when in December we heard about COVID, I had a trip to China, and I came back and looked at my lab, and I said, this bug is going to come to Bangladesh too, as everybody feared. In March, it was already there. And so I tried to use every facility that I had in my setting. I have one lab at ICDDRB, one lab, a foundation that I have actually founded for science and health. And these two labs became ready to target COVID. And so we started doing the testing. We had lots of strains from all over Bangladesh, north, south, everywhere. We worked with the government.
But it was a time that was interesting in terms of innovation and collaboration all over the world. So that might perhaps be something that will be continued because learned.
Yes, we will never stop. COVID-19 has taught us that, you can use whatever you have to contribute. And it's not only that we have contributed, the whole country is contributing. Every laboratory now, which has some genomic equipment, is now contributing to the GIS AI data that's global. So even if we are not working together, we know what BCSR is doing, what CHRF is doing. We can just get all the data about the variants that are coming in Bangladesh. So that's exceptional, actually.
What would you say to young women hesitating to become scientists in your field of expertise, with your life experience? What would you like to share with them?
Yeah, so it's a good question because I do that all the time. I can get emails from a woman saying that I don't want to continue. Then I say, come to me, I'll talk to you. And I tell them, I had 3 children. I continued. We have to find a way. So maybe you come early, go early. Come early, go back home early, that takes care of the children. Find someone, in Bangladesh, it's easy to find a person to take care of your child. And I'd give them my own examples. So one woman actually just sent me an email saying she was going to have another baby, and so she had problems and she was going to give up. And I said, come and meet me. And she's back. Because you can tell them your own story. I also have 3 children. I did it all. It's never easy. You forget about it, but it's never easy. So I think I love the men also who work with me. But for the woman, it's a special feeling because I can see what they are going through. They want to have a life in science, but they also have other responsibilities. So to find a balance between the two, and I try to tell them about myself and about the things that they can do to make it easier. And many of them stay behind, not that all. Some just say that, no, we can't. They move away.
Yeah, and as we do need women in research, we should also make it a little bit easier for them, to allow them to balance all this and encourage them to take science careers. Thank you very much, Professor Kadri. Thank you for being with us today and for sharing your expertise and your experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, too.
Resilience is strength. Resilience is the ability to adapt, the ability to change.
in your field for what is relevant and what is needed for you to do as a woman.
There is a lot of challenges that we face as scientists, and especially women in science. And I think resilience is the only weapon that we can use to go through this journey and this battle.
That resilience I have faced on my life, and I am happy to say that I overcome it most of the time.
Finding the mentors, finding people that will guide you and show you the ropes.
Not for 1 minute think that you do not belong to this field of science. We do.
Our health systems have become an everyday topic on people's minds in societies around the world. The emergency question has been resilience, keeping health systems going in the face of extraordinary challenges. We look today in the next roundtable at the question that follows from this: how to achieve better health solutions.
Welcome to the roundtable about unbiased health solutions for the future. As you know, everything, unfortunately, is biased because we are always talking and working from a specific place. So for a long time, we thought that medical solutions, health research is neutral, unbiased. Well, the last 30 years, a lot of researchers have worked to identify that there is very often a gender bias because we are thinking that we thought that women are just smaller examples of men. There were differences in treatment, in diagnosis, in symptoms that were not always taken into account. Now there is another issue coming in, which is the digital, the technical revolution, and there might be new biases, but also a lot of opportunities. So we are going to talk about unbiased health solutions for the futures with our great speakers. So I have the pleasure to welcome Mrs. Sakiko Fukuda-Parr, who is Professor of International Affairs, New School, and co-director at the Collective for the Political Determinants of Health at the University of Oslo. Thank you very much for being with us. We also have Professor Firdousi Qadri, Senior Scientist and Head, Mucosal Immunology and Vaccinology Unit, Infectious Diseases Division, the International Center for Diarrheal Disease Research. Thank you very much. And on the screen, we see Professor Andrew Horn, Professor of Gynecology and Reproductive Sciences, University of Edinburgh, and co-director of EXPECT Center for Pelvic Pain and Endometriosis. Hello, Andrew. Thank you for being with us. And Ms. Mei Young, Vice President, Innovative Healthcare Solutions, Global Happy Life Technology. So, Andrew, let me start with you. You are working on an issue, endometriosis, that we know is an issue that was for a long time not really considered, treated, identified. So can you explain to us a little bit how that has changed in the last year, what it is about, and how gender bias might have played a role in this?
Endometriosis, for those of you who don't know, and I hope everybody knows a bit about it now, because we've spent a long time trying to raise awareness about this condition. It's where there's tissue like the lining of the womb outside of the womb, commonly within the pelvis. But the big problem with it is it's associated with pain, often very debilitating pain. The challenges that we've faced with endometriosis have been around, first of all, lack of awareness. And this in turn has led to a long time from when a patient with the condition presents with symptoms to being diagnosed, and that's estimated at anything between 7 to 8 years. The other challenge that we have is we're very limited with regard to the treatments available. These are broadly broken down into hormone treatments and treatments to remove the disease. I think to answer your question about why we're in this situation now and what's happening now, it's been largely because this has been seen as a women's condition. It's not been talked about. It's an invisible condition, if you like, because it's a pain condition. So it's suffered for these reasons. And I think the lack of awareness around it has meant that maybe patients presenting with painful symptoms, maybe their friends, their families have maybe said, not being able to differentiate when normal is not normal. And similarly, when they've gone to see medical professionals, they've perhaps not been well enough informed to pick out the diagnosis and to move forward with investigations and treatment. The one positive thing I would say is because of a huge push around awareness, both with the public and amongst medical professionals, we've seen big changes, I would say, certainly in the last 5 years. So that's fantastic, but there's still a lot more to do.
These changes are also related because we talk more openly, certainly, about gender bias, about issues that concern women, about sexism also. That has accelerated the possibilities of doing research on this issue, of finding new treatments.
I think so. I mean, I think women's health issues are talked about a lot more. I think funders are much more concerned about ensuring that there's equality in the division of, the finances into women's health issues. But I still find it very challenging. I mean, for example, these figures I think are about 5 years old now, but in the States, for a condition like diabetes, which is as common in women as something like endometriosis, there's still 35 times the investment into diabetes compared to endometriosis. And I think this is largely because it is a condition that affects both sexes. And I think that sort of thing needs to change.
So how is digital technologies coming into diagnosis and better treatments?
So I think digital health can help in a number of ways. I mean, it helps, as I'm sure the panel know, in terms of making clinical trials easier and perhaps cheaper and quicker to run. Digitalization helps with patient identification, recruitment and retention into trials because you can use social media. There are obviously challenges with making sure you use appropriate language and make sure it's accessible to different genders, different groups. I think the other point is around data collection. Obviously, if you're working with women, as I do, young women, you want to minimize the number of hospital visits, for example. So using things like apps, using wearable tech like smartwatches can be helpful in collecting data. Specifically around endometriosis in terms of changing clinical care, as well as trials around new treatments and using these sort of digital aspects, which I talked about. I think what we really need to do is be able to use digital means to collect huge amounts of data around symptoms in order to maybe potentially develop algorithms, identify patterns, which could help with the diagnosis of the conditions.
So, Professor Kadri, how does this resonate with your work in the field and on the ground? What opportunities digital and technology bring to you?
Thank you for this question, because I was very excited to hear what is happening for endometriosis, which is a problem everywhere. I would say digital health in my field is extremely important. If I talk about all the vaccine work I'm doing, about the disease surveillance, the disease burden. I mean, let me talk about Bangladesh, since I'm Bangladeshi. So for us, it's an important agenda now. And so it's digital health for all by 2021, which I'm sure will not be possible. But there's been steps all over. In my field, the surveillance data that we are doing on cholera, or the government data that's emerging every now and then. We have a management information system, very strong, that was from the last 10, 15 years. Now, these are very important things, but also digital health is trying to get across to the country at different levels, which is very important for me when I want to think about cholera, typhoid. And when I want to talk about COVID, so I need to know what's happening all over the country. And so we have electronic systems that are becoming available. So the whole health system is now being pushed to the very periphery of the country, like through community health clinics. And through those things, every community health clinic also has internet access. They have internet access, and the community health workers at the very lowest level of reaching the people have Android tabs, and they get the data, and that's uploaded and then goes into the MIS. I just take the example of COVID. I know now we have a system that's called Shurokkha, that I know how many people are infected, at least how many are getting tested. I can just go there. There's data on vaccine, that 10% or 14% of the people are getting vaccine. Everything that's coming is going into the MIS system and is being uploaded. So there are dashboards. So these digital health information systems are very important, and more so because of what's happening lately. Nothing is perfect, but it's started and it's being used. There's a family planning phone number, digitalization. So you can call and you can talk, and which was not available earlier. So everything needs to be improved, but it has started, it's being used. So telemedicine during these last 2 years has been used a lot, and it's becoming like people are becoming used to the apps. On this, not even smartphones, on their ordinary phones, they can have access.
Do you think it might be even easier to get them to contact a doctor, to get in touch than it was before? Or it is just a new way adding on?
I think when you look at the doctor to 170 million ratio, it's very bad. It's very, very poor. But telemedicine makes you come closer. It's not perfect at all, but it's another digitalization that is becoming very useful.
Thank you very much. May, Happy Life is a digital technology company, so how do you see, particularly in China, but also globally, the potential of digital technology for women's health?
I'm so glad to hear our colleagues here about the digital health, about how we can leverage technology to improve healthcare. Actually, that's really the technology, the AI, the machine learning are really running our blood, because we're a data science company. We're one of the pioneer company within China. What we have been doing the past few years is really to leverage the big data and the AI technology to improve healthcare. So we have actually worked on several systems, very like what Dr. Borney had discussed about how to use the data to help improve the clinical development, let's say finding the patients from the medical electronic medical record and help recruit patients, help the study, and using algorithm, using modeling to predict which are the most relevant target population or which are the most effective treatment. Those kind of questions can all be addressed using big data, using technology, machine learning, and some other algorithm. We have been all working on that. I think this type of technology definitely is very powerful tools to be able to improve the efficiency of doing research, and also to be able to help the researcher and also help the pharma companies to develop the medication quicker, to get the medication which has the most unmet need to the patients more efficiently, and make it affordable, because I think the affordability is a really big issue in China as well as globally.
Thank you very much, May. So we see that there are a lot of opportunities related to technology, data, digital. But Professor Sakiko Fukuda, you also talk about risks, because what we have seen already during the festival, how much bias is also in the development of artificial intelligence. Just 22% of researchers in artificial intelligence are women. Bias is always coming in. So what are the risks that you see from your perspective of working a lot on this issue?
Well, I like to think of it as technologies being very powerful instruments for improving human lives. But the impact that technology has, whether it's digital or artificial intelligence or whatever, depends on the purpose for it, which it is to put, and ultimately on the way that it is designed and developed and deployed. But there are consequences in terms of, in fact, worsening inequality, gender inequality, social inequalities. And there are a lot of issues about misuse and human rights threats and ethical issues. And for example, with respect to telemedicine, it can be a wonderful tool, but the access to it is very much driven by the digital divide. And whether it works or not, I think depends very much on the social context within which it is used. Like there's a study looking at telemedicine, a project in Ghana and India, mHealth. And basically, women in rural areas, particularly in lower income groups, don't have access to even a normal smartphone. And often there is or even just a telephone. A telephone is, a mobile phone is shared within the family. And you know that the household is a site of patriarchy, and the control over this phone is often in the hands of the male. It then becomes a kind of a site of contestation where women who are being given this advice by telephone to follow their pregnancy are often then given advice that is not contextualized to the local traditions and culture. So it hasn't been designed in a sort of a participative way with a local community, giving advice that goes contrary to local traditions, and without an explanation of why new practices like how to feed your baby and so forth might differ from what your family had done before. So there are these recommendations and a lot of discussion about how the design has to take account of these social context, and that if you don't do that, it's not just that, well, you have one person who might get a benefit from it and another who doesn't, but the overall social impact is actually exaggerating, amplifying these inequalities that exist.
Yeah, so you say there are three elements. It's design, development, and deployment, because they're in every phase, there are risks. And so are this kind of technologies developed in a participatory manner in order to take into account all the elements? Does this resonate with you, Professor Kadi?
I don't think it has developed in that way yet. And gender has not been taken into account so much. Now, while you were talking, I was thinking about the data policy. There may be so many things gender-related that needs to be confidential, because a woman is now going for telemedicine, is talking to these getting into these different apps and talking about things, and if she doesn't even have her own personal phone, she wouldn't like her partner, her husband, her family, her in-laws to know what she's doing. I think the data policy is still not there. The thinking behind the differences between the male and the female, the needs is still being processed, because this needs to be there. So thinking about what you said just now, I feel that it's very, very important to have the confidentiality, the data policy in place, and to also tailor-make it more to the need of the woman. Men can go out to many clinics and get a lot, but the woman inside the home with her child, for the child and for herself, consider endometriosis. If that becomes available, as women suffer so much all over the world. So I think it has to be tailor-made to gender needs.
Do you have the impression that, because what I hear is that we see and have opportunities with digital and technology, we put them out, and then we try to correct the negative effects. So do you think we are still in that stage, or more and more people think about design for taking into account when you design all other gender and inequality issues?
Well, I think there is, but I think a lot more awareness needs to be given. But I think there are other kinds of risks that have to do with a broader social impact. I mean, you talked about the confidentiality of the information that is given, and data breach, data privacy. These are human rights issues that we know exists, and it is not the doctor or the clinician that is at stake. It's the way in which this digitalized data then becomes owned and mined and exploited for other purposes. And I think we quickly then have to consider what kinds of governance systems that we have. The governance of this sort of data is still very much in infancy. I mean, it is basically a kind of an unregulated space. We also have this problem that there is this sense of techno-optimism, you know, seeing technology as a silver bullet that will solve all problems, and unquestioningly seeing that all of the technological design has been scientifically verified. And you take something like the mobile telephone apps for tracing contacts of people during COVID, and you know, many studies have been done on this, and you know, reviews of these studies show that there's very thin evidence at best that these telephone apps actually produce accurate information. So there is this responsibility to be much more rigorous, this responsibility to be much more careful about the social impact of these devices.
But still innovating, because technology and digital offer incredible opportunities. How is the debate in the UK about the risks related to the opportunities of digital technology health solutions?
So I think similar to other members of the panel, the big issue is around trust. I think certainly working in research, people are still scared about offering up their data, exposing themselves to, you know, to industry stealing their data, those sorts of things. So I think working to ensure that people understand that their data is only going to be used for specific projects. So the big bit of work I think that we have to do is around consent and ensuring that patients fully understand who has access to their data, and that they're only giving permission for specific projects. The issue, I suppose, with that for me, for example, as a researcher, is that projects change, you know, grow arms and legs. You identify new areas that you want to pursue. So if you have this fantastic volume of data that you've collected for a specific project, you always want to have the opportunity to be able to use it again in other fields. So that's a challenge. I think the other challenge is, certainly for me as a researcher, is it's still not cheap to conduct studies like this. You want to conduct them at scale, and so these sorts of pieces of work require huge amounts of funding, and that still is a big challenge, particularly in women's health, where funding seems to still be slightly limited, certainly in the UK, and I think certainly in the States and in Australia, I know that's the case as well.
So May, you are very optimistic, of course, for the future. You have clients as a company. Do they ask you to take gender into account?
Unfortunately, so far I haven't got a request about the gender difference. In my previous work, there are some research looking into racial difference in the States, because I used to work in the States for a long time. Most of my time working for global pharma companies. I haven't really worked on any women's health product before. So I think that's probably one of the reasons I haven't been exposed to any request about looking particular into gender difference. So I think, but I fully agree with the previous discussion about the data security, the patient privacy, which is very, very important. I think for regardless we're a pharma company or a data science company, this is always our top priority to make sure we're following the compliance. We're keeping the privacy of the patients. That's always our priority. But another aspect I want to discuss a little bit is I feel another challenge or risk is about the data quality. I think data quality is very like for China, especially for China, compared to the more advanced country like US or some European countries, is that the data quality, and to a researcher, data quality is critical, because we always believe garbage in, garbage out. For a data science company, and when we do research, if the data quality is low, that means our research cannot be high quality research. And that has big impact to the results, because say if we really want to raise the awareness about women's health, women's unmet need, we want to quantify it. We want to accurately, precisely quantify it. Then we get the research done, we get published, we raise the voice. But before that, we have to make sure our data quality is strong enough to support our statement of that unmet need, about that burden to women. So we at least for our company, we have been fighting for really improve the data quality in China. We have trying to support our clients as well. It's not only about pharma companies, it's also research institute, it's also patients, doctors, hospitals, to try to build up an ecosystem that we can share the knowledge, that we can connect everyone together in the system, that we can build up the system and then make the high quality data, make the high quality research to help patients to gain better access to the medication they need.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it shows once again how systemic the issue is, because the research has to be well designed, taking into account gender data in order to have the right data quality to then have the right treatment. So it's a whole system that has to take into account gender and social parameters. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for being with us to talk about unbiased health solutions in the future for women. And thank you for being with us, and I hope you enjoyed this roundtable.
We are now coming to the end of the first edition of the For Women in Science Festival. I hope that, like me, you have been inspired by these fabulous women who are rocking the world of science. Let's hear once more from these women about what resilience means to them as women in science. Then I'll meet you again to conclude the festival with an interview between Audrey Azoulay, Director General of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organizations, and Jean-Paul Agon, Chairman of the Fondation L'Oréal.
Resilience is about being more like Avengers.
It is kind of a superpower. It's something that we need to fight all of the difficulties that we find in our way.
Women have so much power when they have the opportunity.
Resilience is to be able to do all we can to pursue our dream.
Following your dream, following your passion.
Not pay attention to criticism.
Do not focus on what other people think about you, but
what you think about yourself.
Our For Women in Science journey brings us back to those who graciously brought us together, UNESCO and the Fondation L'Oréal. I now have the pleasure to have with me Madame Audrey Azoulay, the Director General of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, and also Monsieur Jean-Paul Agon, the President of the Fondation L'Oréal. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madame Azoulay, UNESCO celebrated its 75th anniversary recently, and science was one of the highlights. So it seems now, for the first For Women in Science festival, science seems to be quite high on the political agenda, and it is also squarely in the public's eye. So how do you see the UNESCO contribution to science, and especially to women in science, which is called for by the 30 women scientists that are taking the stage today?
First, it's a pleasure to participate in this festival because the issues we are going to talk about and the issues raised by these women are structural, are fundamental. So here at UNESCO, you mentioned we've celebrated our 75th anniversary, and the science, the S in UNESCO, has always been at the core of the mandate. UNESCO was built and was imagined during the war, and with this idea that we needed science to build peace, we needed international cooperation in science, and also we needed to take more into account the social impact of science, and today I would say its ethical impact. And this has led to many initiatives of UNESCO in science during this history in terms of international cooperation on ocean science, on biodiversity, on major infrastructure like the CERN in Europe for nuclear research, or the SESAMI in the Middle East, things like that. But what we see today, and you were right to mention that science is very high on the agenda, is that most of the challenges we face need scientific response to deal with them. It's the case for, of course, the climate disruption, the loss of biodiversity, also the ethical impact of big data, of technology in our world. And for all this, we need more investment in science. And our number shows that there is not enough investment in science. But not only do we need more investment in science, we need a more inclusive science, and we need more women participation in science. And here again, the numbers are very bad. Despite all our efforts, today, when you look at the number of the proportion of women among researchers, it's only a third, more or less. And this number is not increasing really, despite all our efforts. When you look at also the scientists, the professionals in the field of AI or of big data, it's around 20% only, 2022. And when you look at the composition of the academia, the scientific academia around the world, it's around 10%. So we have a real deficit of women in science, and we work here to try and to lift the barriers that still prevent women participation in science. We do it through education in the programs, or to facilitate education for girls in STEM. And we do it for now, 23 years with L'Oréal in a fantastic program that promotes women in science by giving more visibility to exceptional female scientists, but also to support young researchers in their field across the globe. So we combine our strength, those of L'Oréal and those of UNESCO, our networks, to encourage women into scientific careers. And this is something I think which is very important, and that we do across all our activities to try and have this gender equality dimension in everything we do. In science, it's very much needed. It's also needed in our normative instrument in science. We are discussing now in UNESCO an open science recommendation. The gender dimension is very important. Also another one on the ethics of artificial intelligence. Here again, we have an issue on that. But this program with L'Oréal has been a success, and we hear it from many of our laureates, to encourage and also to give hope and to give young women this impetus to go into science.
Monsieur Argon, the For Women in Science Festival gives a much needed forum now for the women scientists. They can introduce their discoveries, they can talk about their researches, but they can also share their thoughts about biases and also about the systematic discrimination that takes place in science and that stands in the way of gender balance in science. For you personally, what are the key messages that you take away, and also how do you see what actions need to be taken in the future that are crucial?
Yeah, there are several key messages, you're right. Well, number one is that this festival shows that these women scientists are just extraordinary. You know, what we have seen today is really extraordinary. The quality, the level, the ambition of these women scientists is fantastic. And it confirms what Mrs. Azoulay said about the importance of women in science. You know, women scientists can really change the world. And you know, we used to say that the world needs science and science needs women, and this is more true than ever. So that's the number one thing. It illustrates the importance of this battle. Number two, it shows also, as you said, that women are still really underrepresented in science, and it is just not acceptable. You know, why would we sacrifice, or why would we do without women in science? You know, women have to be in science, and they can bring absolutely a lot. And as you said, there is still, many barriers, glass ceilings that limit their careers and their developments. So that's I think very important. And in terms of what the critical action for the future can be, I think that number one, as Mrs. Azoulay said, we need to give more visibility to these women scientists, because we need to inspire the next generation. You know, we need to make young girls attracted to science, young girls confident that they can be successful in a scientific career, and sometimes they are not. Sometimes they are afraid that it's not for them, that science is not for girls, so we have to encourage them. Number two, I think also that we have to unleash the potential of women scientists in new disciplines. You know, we have made progress thanks to the great program with UNESCO, the L'Oréal Foundation and UNESCO in the past 23 years. You know, we have had 122 laureates, we had 3,800 fellowships in 110 countries. So we made a lot of progress and developed the presence of women in science, but it has been mostly in some scientific disciplines like biomedicine, biology, all these sciences, but there is still a lot to be done in other disciplines like mathematics, physics, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, and all these disciplines are super crucial for the future. So we need to stimulate women in this field. And to finish with, a different idea is that we think that we should also enroll men scientists, because by definition we cannot revolutionize science, and we cannot make sure that women are more integrated in the scientific world if men are not helping. You know, it's true in science like it is in any other part of the society. So we have a program called Men for Women in Science, where we really try to motivate men to accept and develop and promote the careers of women in science. So it's a great program. We are very happy and proud to have this program developed with UNESCO, and we are sure that we are really contributing to a better science for tomorrow.
I hope so. It sounds like it. Thank you so much, Monsieur Argon. Thank you, Madame Azoulay, for these motivating, also open words. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, it is indeed up to us all to ensure a brighter future for women in science, because only if we reach gender balance in science can science fully respond to the ever-growing needs of people and the planet.